In this lecture, we'll be taking a look at an erosional landscape, in this case, a shore zone landform feature. Again, when we're taking a look at shore zone environments, we can be looking at them in both a marine environment and a freshwater environment. But generally, when we're looking at these land features, these landforms, we're really looking at erosional history over the last 5,000 years. And this would coincide with the end of the Wisconsin period of glaciation. It is also a fact that when we look at shore zone landforms, we are looking at something that is unique to the Holocene, and that the Holocene epoch itself is an extremely complex time with regard to geomorphological processes. Shore platforms are very common in marine environments, especially when we are looking at processes of chemical weathering and the interaction, the interplay in a sense, between, in this case, saltwater environments and shoreline land features. Where we have postglacial rises in sea level, this has created these unique features. What we see is in situations where we have formerly hilly slope environments along a shore, we start to see a cliff and bench kind of landscape develop over time. Cliffs, again, are controlled in terms of other processes, erosional and otherwise. We see in shoreline cliff environments mass wasting. We also see situations where, at least in intertidal environments, these very flat features become dominant. So the intertidal environment becomes something that we will look at a little more closely with regard to the processes that are associated with a change in a shore zone landform environment. Shore zone geomorphology is very, very unique. As I have mentioned previously, the shores of places like the Great Lakes, a freshwater environment, provide geographers with a wide range of static uplift landforms, and this static uplift that again is closely tied to a process of deglaciation very much will impact the cliff and bluff features, as well as the beach and even the platform features that we associate with both the western and eastern sides of a Great Lake environment such as Lake Michigan. As I said previously, also, when we're talking about shore zone land forms, we are talking about the Holocene and and this kind of post-glacial environment. It's a time when our understanding of base level and modern sea levels is established, and that, again, sea level and base level become, in a sense, important mathematical concepts that are driving all of the erosional processes that are associated with these shoreline environments. Water level weathering typifies the modern expression of shore zone landforms. It is also the primary means for their continued change. Water level weathering is most apparent along shore landscapes that express some sort of exposed bedrock or exposed rock material. This is where it's more easily measured and where it is more easily understood in terms of how it is playing out over time. An example, again, of a freshwater environment where we see a lot of this water level weathering occurring would be Devil's Lake in Wisconsin. This region is part of the periglacial driftless area of the state, and water erosion, at least water level erosion, is very, very common when we take a look at the lake levels and what's occurring at that level of the water table in that environment. Similar kinds of water level erosion patterns are also visible in the Chalk Cliffs region of modern England and France. So it's something that we can see both in a marine or in a freshwater environment. In marine environments, water level weathering creates, again, these shore platform environments, these elongated, flat expressions of shoreline terrain. In a shore platform environment, we see quite a bit of evidence for chemical weathering and chemical deposition. So we see evidence of chemical precipitation. We see, again, chemical weathering and erosion. And then, of course, we also see chemical abrasion occurring, again, associated with wave action and water action in these environments. Solution platforms, when we have carbonic or carbonate forms of rock material, can be extremely dramatic. And it's also good locations to be able to study how a shoreline interacts with the chemistry of local waters in this case. So it becomes a very dramatic shoreline landscape. So too, the hydraulic pressure and the turbulence associated with breaking waves and breakers themselves can erode and easily weather and fracture the exposed bedrock of a shoreline environment. And again, the chemistry of the water can either accelerate this or can act sometimes as a stabilizing agent in this process. The initial stage for shoreline platform erosion is generally the removal of rock by waves, so usually it is the most intense of the erosional processes. Later on, we start to see, in this case, lower energy expressions in these environments, and we start to see abrasion occurring and chemical weathering. But it, again, generally begins by very kind of intensive plucking and quarrying of large rock material. When we are talking about chemical weathering, and the development of these solution platform environments, again, generally in a marine environment, we are really looking at a very low energy environment when we are looking at the processes. So landscapes that demonstrate the chemistry of lithified sedimentary rocks, or environments where we have the development over very large periods of time of carbonate secreting microorganisms. These are areas where we see these solution platforms developing. Now, when we're looking at these carbonate secreting microorganisms, the byproduct is often referred to as biogenic carbonate. This is material that is visible throughout the history of the oceans, and we see it and are able to track its physical expression with regard to changing sea levels and changing shoreline locations. The ocean floor is covered in this material, and some of these deposits, again, those that are lithified, generally will date back to the Paleozoic, but we see them also throughout the Cenozoic era, in this case the last 65 million years. Foraminifera fall into this category. This would include things like one-time living plankton and, of course, coralline algae material. The reason why this biogenic carbonate is so important is that oxygen isotopic analysis can help us to better understand how these deposits form, and they could tell us something about the changing global climate environment. It can tell us something about changing seawater temperatures and, of course, the water chemistry, which ties into how these particular kinds of coastline landforms are developing over time. So again, carbonate rock landscapes are common throughout the Pacific, and these become excellent resources for understanding not only, again, the changing planet, but also the interplay between energy and matter as it relates to a maritime or a marine environment. The carbonate rock landscapes that we find throughout the Pacific, in terms of good examples for the development of solution platforms and the interplay between carbonate rock types, or these deposits associated with carbonate secreting microorganisms. And seawater can be found throughout the southeastern coastline of what is today Australia. We also see it in places like Easter Island. Other kinds of solution platforms are also found in coastal areas in this case, Hawaii. The reef terrace around modern Jamaica also provides a good example for the work of bicarbonate or biogenic carbonation. Other solution platform landscapes that typify this shore zone landscape would include intertidal regions and beach rock outcrops associated with the southern coast of what is today Africa. Now, there are other forces at work with regard to the development of these landscapes, and especially the solution type. Often it is the case that shore surfaces will become more visible as the current and wave system regresses away from the shoreline between high and low tidal expressions. And this again is called an intertidal kind of environment. And so in intertidal zones, areas where this is very, very common, we see the development of these landscapes. Now, these periods of high and low water surfaces become important to patterns of erosion and then also deposition. And so, again, this is something that a geomorphologist will want to account for as they are looking at how these landforms and landscapes develop and change over time. Finally, the direction of wave action becomes an important variable when we're taking a look at how a shoreline environment will develop over time. The angle at which a wave or a current system is striking the shore becomes very important as we're trying to understand something about how that shoreline will develop and then ultimately change over time. So, for example, if you were to compare a longshore low angle current system to a rip current or a directional current, you would see very different shores as a result of these two different kinds of energy environments. One, a more long-term low energy environment, and another environment that is high energy and very abrupt in nature.